Zubin, can you hear me? Yeah, I think I will go first, okay? And because I want to, finish up a few things, okay? And I'll also be formalizing a little bit, defining more formally what fairness is. And then I thought, you could follow me. Hmm?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, even if you don't find the time today, I'm sure we can do it tomorrow when we speak. Okay, so I think there are quorum, and so I'll start. To close a few windows that will be distracting. Okay, so this was the outline that I had in the last class, out of which we have covered some and not all of them. So we had, first we started by introducing CTL star, and then in the last class I formally defined sublogics, certain sublogics of CTL star. More significantly, CTL and LTL, which are the ones that we will be focusing for most of the course thing. And we saw a toy example to illustrate both the syntax and semantics and the some distinction between CTL and LTL formulas. Today, what I want to do is to continue with a few more illustration for CTL versus LTL, specifically some formulas that you can define in CTL but not in LTL, and vice versa. some significant and interesting properties that you can do in one but not in the other. Towards that end, I want to show some more examples. Then, we'll see another classification of these properties that is useful both for specification and model checking, classifying the properties, any property, see any general CTL star property as a safety property in liveness. I'll be revisiting fairness, giving a little bit more formal definition, and see why it is important, even from a model checking point of view. We've already seen some of that, and so that's what I want to do. So let me go to the slide where I left off last time. This is the one that I had. Yeah, and we saw this, and in this case, all these properties, LTL properties, which we illustrated, I'm not going to go through this example again, except to make the point that you could specify for each of these LTL properties in CTL by adding a universal quantifier. Okay, A in this particular case, but that you yes. Okay, so that is what I want to stress. But yes, and we will see the impact of the restriction, the impact of the restriction of that CTL requires of having to pair up the path quantifiers with the temporal operators. Okay, for that, I will move to the next example. Consider these 4 properties. They are all, when you remove the quantifiers, they are GF. So you already saw GF in the last example. So what does GF, the LTL property GF of P, denote? What does it signify?
Certain property occurs infinitely many times.
Correct. Now, yeah, so I want to elaborate on this. These are the variations in the CTL form, okay? So the 4 different possible ways in which I can intersperse the path quantifier and, and see if which of these are equivalent or not equivalent to the LTL property that you get by removing the path quantifiers, GF of P. Let's see for each of them what it denotes. I'm going to be showing you the branching time thing, okay? So see, whenever you want to talk about equivalence of 2 formulas, whether they're LTL or thing, or between LTL and CTL, you have to, technically what you have to do is to prove that on every model transition system, the 2 are indistinguishable. That's when they are equivalent. So you have to argue that by not specifically referring to on the behavior of the branching structure itself and the parts within them, without actually, other than assuming that you have the AP contains the labels that you want, you should not be, your argument should be independent of the transition relation itself. That you should argue that without any loss of generality, that it should hold good for all kinds of behaviors. So what does AG of F of P, okay, as a CTL formula, that it says that on every path from an initial state, okay, that is from a root, then on every path, you have to have a state, okay, in for which the AF of P should be true, okay, should hold. What does that mean? So that every state on every path originating from the root will have to satisfy P, okay? The probability P. In this case, I'm, just for simplicity, I'm making that to be an atomic predicate. So this is what you have. So, there must be this kind of, forest here. So all leaves, a cut of this, where, every path should end up eventually with a crossed label. A cross label here denotes P, okay? So yeah, so you agree with that, no? So that's how it should be. So if that is the case, then you can see that it certainly will be equivalent to GF of P, correct? Because what does GF of P require on the same behavior? It just enumerates all the paths separately, and then for each path it asks this question if eventually, or for every path, eventually you will reach a point at which f of P is true. And that's obviously true, because every path that you enumerate in here will have to pass through all these cross thing in here, at which point f of P will hold good, okay? So this is how you will have to reason, okay? So in LTL, you have to separately enumerate the paths and then ask the question whether the concerned property satisfies that, is satisfied by all the paths. Whereas here, you have to intersperse path and state argument, okay? That is the thing. So let's move to the second formula, AG of EF of P. So this states that globally, on every path, every state on every path should be such that EF of P holds good. That is, from each of those states, there must be, there exists a path on which P holds, okay? Yeah, so this is certainly weaker than AG of AF of P. So it only requires that every state on every path has to be such that eventually there exists only a single path. So for example, here there are several infinite paths for which, GFF is never true. So if you look at the right side, so this path also satisfies EF of P, because I've made sure that from each of these states on this rightmost path, I hope you can see my cursor, okay, with the cross cursor, okay? So the rightmost path is what I'm referring to. There, I mean, although none of the states there might satisfy P, or that path itself may never have eventually a point at which P holds good, but still AG of EF of P is true, because you see each of those states does have a path on which P eventually becomes true, okay? So that's what, you have to ensure. So, so as you can see, that this is certainly not equivalent to G of F of P, because that would require that every path, there's obviously one path, the path on the rightmost extreme, and as a matter of here also, the leftmost extreme, that path, will never satisfy GF of P, okay? So that is what you have to appreciate, okay, and understand. So that, to begin with, it looks like a bit too subtle, but once the important thing is to make the distinction, okay? LTL, you only view paths, whereas here you'll be asking questions about states on various paths, okay? So similarly, so this is certainly not equivalent to G of F of P. So is this. So is the third one. So this only requires that from the root, there exists a path in which globally, that is, every state on that path is such that there exists one path from each of those states on which eventually P holds good. Okay, and here this is good enough. You see, this is the only point. I mean, I have only one cross here because, as you can see, it is good enough to have this because this path that I'm moving my cursor on is certainly a path in which that property holds good, because what it requires is from each of those states on that path, there must be a path which eventually P holds good. And since I have marked it here, so you see this state, this state, this state, all of them hold good. And once it is hold good, all the other states will certainly have, you know, the yeah. So once you have a P holding good in here, so all the paths originating from there satisfy EF of P also. And this is slightly different. I think I might have made a mistake here. So I should have a cross on the right side as well. Okay, either here, I mean, right at the root, or here, or one of at both these things. Okay, so this requires that there must exist a path on which every state should satisfy this AF of P property. Every state, every path originating from that should have P becoming true eventually. So this is certainly does not satisfy. I mean, the way my marking is wrong. Do you agree? So because I only have here and here, so certainly this is the path I had in mind. So if that is the yeah, so either this path or this path. So, if obviously this is not enough, you need a little more crossed states here, because if every path, so you will have to have the initial state also satisfy AF of P. So which means that on this side also you should have some states. Okay, specifically if I had marked here and here, you would. Okay, but this also, I argue that is, can leave out some states. Okay, so but what the moral of the story is two things. The takeaway that I want you to have is that how you differentiate between path LTL path oriented properties with the thing. Now I'm claiming that this is how these four formulas are related, but I haven't checked this completely. Maybe 4 and 3 are incomparable. Okay, so that I don't know, but nonetheless, it is the case that none of them, except the first one, AG of A of P is equal to G of F of P. Okay. And whenever you make this argument, I am to re-emphasize that you will have to do it in, the argument should be such that it has to be true for an arbitrary transition system. Okay? I mean, if you want to prove that it is equal, but if you want to show that they're distinct, as long as you can show that there is a transition system in which those two things are not equal, that is good enough. So yes, and the main point is, it turns out, yes. So there is a general result, which comes in handy to check if that actually reduces the expressibility of CTL property, the expressibility whether a particular formula in CTL can be is expressible in LTL or not, to the problem of checking if two formulas, LTL formulas, are equivalent. And that's what this result, the statement that I have here. So if you drop all the path quantifiers from a CTL formula, and you obtain an LTL formula, if that is equivalent to if those two, after you drop you get an LTL, if that is equivalent to the original CTL formula, if they are not equivalent, then that CTL formula cannot be expressed as an LTL formula. That is the general result. Okay. Now, since in this case none of these three things are equivalent to G of f of p, we can conclude by using the theorem that AG, all these things are not representable in LTL. Okay. So that is, this theorem comes in very handy when you want to check if a particular CTL formula is representable in LTL or not. You drop off the column quantifiers and then you check if they are equivalent or not. If they're not equivalent, then you can't represent them in LTL. So you can find lots of such formulas. Generally, if you end up having embedded existential quantifiers anywhere that that you won't that are won't be representable in LTL. Okay, so now for answering the question, whether there are LTL formulas that are not representable by CTL, you may think that, oh, path quantifiers, adding path quantifiers kind of strictly enhances the expressiveness of the logic. But because of this restriction that CTL imposes, that you will have to use them you can't separate them. Okay, do LTL operations before you use path quantifier. Because of that restriction, it turns out there are LTL formulas that are not representable in CTL. To illustrate that, I'm going to use this, my favorite mod 4 counter example. And consider the LTL formula f of g. Okay, f of g is also a very useful and commonly occurring property. Okay, what does f of g as an LTL formula property denote? So this is true of a path. This is an LTL formula of a path. If on that path, eventually at some point, from there, you have AB, in this case, AB is equal to 0, continuously true. Okay? It's not infinitely often, but what it says is eventually you reach a point after which a certain condition continuously holds good forever. Okay, this is it's also referred to by the name persistence property. Eventually, there is a persistent behavior. Okay, so I'm asking the question. So that's what this property denotes, viewed as an LTL property. Okay, so does this hold good for the extreme right path on this, the branching behavior of this mod 4 counter starting from 0, 1, 1? Does it specifically hold good for this extreme right path that I'm moving my cursor over, starting from 0, 1, 1.
Yes, right.
It holds.
Yeah, so it does. It actually, you know, since it's 1, from the very next state, it persistently is continuously AB is equal to 0. Now, the question is there a CTL formula that can represent this? Okay, if you, and you try all kinds of path quantifiers, you know, you'll see that you will not be able to. Certainly, I mean, you would think that maybe EF of AG of AB is equal to 0, you know, should hold with that there exists a path from this, okay? And you would hope that putting an AG here would make you know, this particular path satisfy that, but that is not true, okay? Because EF of AG of AB is 0. What does that require? It says, specifically referring to this rightmost path, it requires that from every state on that path, it requires that every path from that state you know, should have AB is equal to 0, continuously holding good. So, I mean, you get that because you're, yeah. So, but obviously it does not, because these states have other paths. Okay, the ones going to the right on which you know, AB is equal to 0 is not true continuously. Okay, because you can you know, all there are paths in which the reset can, you know, toggle, and you know, it is not the case. Okay, so you see, that's the point you know, that I want to raise. So it turns out that obviously EF itself is not 0. Even AF of AG of A in general is not, you know, it is not you know, equal to FG of A. And you try you know, this is FG of A, okay, not GF of A. Okay, so you know, that will also be not true. You can always find transition systems that make these two things you know, different. And you can see here, even AF of AG of A is not equal to F of G of A. Look at this transition system on the right side, okay, you know, that I have here. So here you start with a state, okay, S naught, you know, A is, you know, the infinite state S naught omega. There, you know, certainly FG of A holds good for this transition system, because what are the paths there, infinite paths? There's one path S naught omega, where S naught is continuously repeated, or there is another path in which you are here finitely many times, and after which you end up going to S2, in which you stay permanently. Those are the two different kinds of paths on this thing. And both of those paths, both those kinds of paths, you have F of G of A being satisfied, correct? Because you know, once you get to S2, you have that. I mean, you have continuously A holding good, and so is the case here. Whereas this AF of AG of A is not true. Okay, I mean, that is, it's not, it's certainly not equal to F of G of A, because this infinite path, see, because this requires, you know, just like what I showed on the mod 4 counter, that every state, I mean, every state eventually, I mean, on every state, eventually you have to reach a point, a state from which all paths should have, you know, A to be true on all the paths. And that can never happen here, because you can see that you take the path S naught omega, okay, you know, the S naught itself, you know, does not satisfy AG of A, because it has a path originating from that, in which in the very next state A is not true. Okay, so Yeah. So do you see that? Okay, because here you're asking the question. The question that you're asking in CTL about the subformula is about a question on the state, not on the path, and therefore this is one counter example to showing that these two things are not equivalent. Okay. So, and it turns out that in this case, f of g of a, eventually something holds forever, is not representable in CTL at all. Okay. And there are several other things, and that is usually when you have a G followed by F, okay, this kind of a situation occurs, okay? So even if you end up, in this case, that happened to be right at the beginning, but if you can make lots of other examples in which, you can embed this F of G somewhere deep inside and you can have those things not representable, okay? So there's even a much simpler example, okay? So here, and this one, f of a, the LTL formula fa and x of a is not representable in CTL. Okay, what does fa and xa, the LTL formula, denote? What does that property denote? Can someone describe? The one on the right-hand side here. What is A and Fx?
So does A and this XA would mean that right now and at the next state in the path, A holds.
Yeah,
So
so
when we
it
put
is true. It is true of a state if it A holds in that state and the very next state. Okay,
right,
that's
so it's
what this thing. It's true of, that's a state formula. If it's true of a path in which A holds in the first state and XA holds in the next state. Okay, so f of A and XA means it is true of a path if you eventually get to a point where A holds and the very next point state A holds at two consecutive points. Okay, and
Sir, could you repeat why the transition system you have given does not satisfy AFAG, AFAGA? I could not.
no, the one on the right hand side that I given, the small one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that does not satisfy AF of AG of A. I mean, you're asking me why so?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I could not understand. Could you repeat?
Okay. So what this requires is on every path originating from S naught, eventually,
Eventually, everything will be A.
eventually you have to reach a point, every state, eventually you have to reach a state from which every path originating there should satisfy A.
Yes. So it
Okay?
is true, right?
No, that is not true because you consider the path S naught omega from S naught. Okay?
Okay.
That is S naught, S naught, S naught, continuously repeat itself. Okay? Now, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in that, there are, from that state, there is also a path, from an S naught state, there is also another path going to S1.
Yes. But eventually it goes to S2, right?
No, but it may go to S2, but AG does not hold good anymore of that state. The AG of A
But it
states.
needs to hold final. It needs to hold after some
No,
time.
no, 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 no. But no. That's what it needs to. But on that path, on the S naught omega path, all the states are S naught. So, but from S naught, there are two paths. okay? One is where S0 continuously holds, okay? But from each of those states, there is a path going to S1. So AG of A, you should be asking the question if the S0 satisfies AG of A, AG of A, okay? Not G of, AG of A. Does every path satisfy AG of A? No, it does not, because for it to satisfy, every path originating from S0 has to satisfy, but S0, there are paths from S0 that goes through S1 before going to S2, but in S0, A is not satisfied.
No, but that path satisfies AFAG, right? Because F means that after some time.
No, but I'm talking about that may satisfy, but the question is, does S0 satisfy AG of A? That is the question. You're asking the question here, you have to split this into AF. For AF to be true on a particular path, every state on that path eventually has to get to a state in which AG of A should hold good. But S0 omega path has only the same state, S0. And that S0 state does not, on that AG of A, that is the question, okay? It's not AF. As a CTL formula, it is saying, on that path, do I eventually get to a state on which every path from that state satisfies AG of A? But since S0 always has a path that goes to S1, and S2, and you don't even, it's not the AF of A that you're, concerned about, whether that state satisfies AG of A, okay? And that is not the case, because you have to make a switch here. The moment you ask this AF is satisfied on every path. I'm specifically referring to the path in which S0 is repeated infinitely. Okay, it's continuously. Okay, on that path, that state S0 does not satisfy. Just imagine, does S0 satisfy AG of A? So maybe you should ask that question first. Does S0 satisfy AG of A? It does not, because for it to satisfy AG of A, every path originating from S0 has to satisfy A. Continuously A has to hold good. That's not true, because the path that goes from S0, S1, and S2 omega, A is not continuously true, because in S1, A is not true. Therefore, in a path that only has S0, so that cannot, in that AG of A cannot be true. Okay, so that's why this is. So you have to, ask the question about the states on the path. Okay, and it is requiring that every path originating from that has to satisfy them. That's why this is not satisfiable. Okay. Yeah. So. Because S0 does not satisfy AG of A. That is the critical thing. Whereas when you view it as LTL property, that branching thing, that thing of, whether S0, you don't. I mean, you just take the path, isolate the path, and then you will ask the question about the path property. And that's why as F of G of A, on the two paths, it'll hold good. Whereas here, on one of the paths, you're asking question about the state satisfying AG of A. And therefore that of S0, which is not true. Okay. Similarly here, okay. So as an exercise, I will ask you to construct a transition system which distinguishes these two things, on which right-hand side, the LTL property is satisfied, and left side, you can't find one because F of A and X of A is not representable as in a CTL. So this is not even a persistent property. Okay, persistence property F of G is certainly not representable, and this so is this and many others. Okay, So there is this question, okay, at least for showing whether a CTL formula satisfies, is expressible in LTL, you can use the previous theorem by dropping the thing and then reduce. Whereas here you have to, give a reasoning from first principles, okay? So this is not easy proving this. You need a very clever inductive argument on the size of the formula to show if it is not representable. Okay, if you find time, this is of very much of theoretical interest. Okay, I mean, also to understand, I mean, you need first, I mean, what I require, for you is you should definitely understand the intuition as to why these two are not equivalent. That is a minimum that you will require in order to specify. But this is a very clever inductive argument. If we find the time, once we cover the thing, I might get back to showing the proof of this. By the way, all the material that I'm using here for this thing is the book, the supplementary book, the Katoyan book. As I said, I mean, Croning and Clark's book does not have very many examples. As I said, Katoyan's has tons of examples, and he goes into details a lot. And I will publish certain sections of Katoyan that discuss these things that I'm covering today. So as a reference material for you. Okay, Zubin has already uploaded a copy, the PDF copy of Katoyan's book, to a link which he will share on Moodle, and you can use that to read those sections. Okay. So now I'll revisit this slide. So that's why you have seen, okay, that LTL and CTL are strictly incomparable, that there exist several properties expressible in CTL that are not expressed in LTL, and vice versa. Okay, so that is the thing that I wanted to make. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So next, any questions? Okay. So once, so revisit all these examples that I've, put forth. I've made, conscious effort to give you through lots of examples, and the first assignment will be going out, tomorrow. Of course, that will not test your metal at CTL and LTL. That's more Z3 and USMV exercises there, but the following, the second assignment will test your metal in making up CTL and LTL formulas. So you better start reading and understanding these examples. And if you're still not convinced of some of the arguments that I've made in the class, please feel free to raise questions or talk to me. Okay, safety and liveness properties. This is quite important. Okay, this is based on the counterexample. Okay, what is a counterexample? Counterexample is a very important part of model checking. Okay, so a counterexample for a formula phi in any logic, any CTL star-based logic, is in a crypt K model M is a path phi from an initial state in the model that is a witness to a violation of phi. That's what a counterexample is. Depending upon the form of the formula, a counterexample path for the formula can always be finite, always infinite, or both. Okay, some counterexamples may be finite, some counterexamples may be infinite. Okay, and that you can see. So, for example, AG of P, which is same as G of P, which requires that P be continuously true on all the paths. So witness to that is at some point, the moment P stops to hold at some point on the path, there is a violation. So for AG of P, a counterexample, a witness to violation is always finite. So that's a, so whereas for AF of P, which requires that P should eventually hold good, if P is not true now, up to now, I mean, you can always extend it to make P become true, and that you can keep on extending it. And that's why a witness to AF of P, any witness to any witness to violation of AF of P or F of P, which is equivalent, is always an infinite. Okay? I mean, it has to be an infinite path witness. So P until Q has both. Okay, so in those cases, on those paths in which Q is eventually true, but there is a violation because P did not hold good continuously, that those are finite witnesses. And if Q never holds good, ever, that's also a violation, in which case that's a infinite path to that violation. So you can see, I mean, this can get a little bit more complicated as you nest these quantifiers. I mean, these these formulas. But this is the criteria, okay, for defining safety versus liveness. A safety property is a formula whose violation can always be shown by a finite counterexample. So these are some of those kinds of formulas. Yeah. Yeah, there's a special class of safety property among safety properties called an invariant property. This is a special kind of safety property where AG of P in general, if P here is a predicate, a state predicate, okay, then it is considered as an invariant property. Yeah, so you can still, you can maybe AG of X, etc., as long as it does not have nested temporal operators or nested CTL or temporal operators, but it is a state property, meaning a simple state, some predicate on a state, whatever holds good on all paths originating from the initial state. The reason that, see, this classification of safety versus liveness, I mean, model checking is not only, in model checking, algorithms make it a point to give a counter example every time that the property fails. So this classification is important from the point of view of generating counter examples, but also this classification is important to optimize model checking algorithms by exploiting the form of your formulas. And invariant property is one in which can be checked. It's probably the easiest among, because it does not have, you can check it by simply enumerating the set of all states reachable from the initial states, okay, and then check if P holds good for all of those states, because it's not dependent on any kind of a path behavior, even finite, with finite history, and therefore you can simply devise algorithms which just collect all reachable states, and that you can do a lot more efficiently than searching over paths. And that's why this is of quite importance. And then invariant property, even though it is very restricted, it is something that always occurs in lots of things. And people in a model checking, just invariant properties are of quite a bit of interest, in practice. So liveness property, as I've already said, is a formula whose violation cannot always be shown by a finite counterexample. Okay, so there are various things of this kind. So infinitely often, eventually, that something persistently holds, eventually persists, continuously holds. All those things are liveness properties. Oh, what happened? See, furthermore, although these liveness property in general requires, an infinite counterexample, for finite state systems, that counterexample, even when it is finite, is always lasso shaped. Okay, in the sense it has a loop preceded by a finite tail. Okay, finite pre-tail. Okay, that's what I call as lasso shape. It's like this, and then comes around. So this, you will see that we'll exploit this, okay, in devising model checking algorithms, okay. That the fact for finite state systems, especially finite state model checking, can take advantage of this thing, that eventually things have to repeat, okay. Okay, so yeah, any questions here before I move to fairness? Okay. So fairness, we've already looked at fairness, and Zubin also introduced that in the context of CTL, and maybe he will say a little bit more when he adds some things today. So I'm making it a little bit more formal than the way that I had introduced earlier. So just to set the context, this is the mutex example that I showed earlier in one of the earlier lectures, and we saw that liveness properties invariably don't hold good when you use non-determinism. Okay, the way asynchronous systems are defined, because it ends up including certain behaviors which are nonsensical behaviors, which are uninteresting and usually don't occur in practice. So these self loops here are all the cases where a process, although it is enabled, it can make a progress, is ignored forever. Okay, those kinds of paths are uninteresting and should be ignored. This is model checking is defined in the present non-determinism has this drawback. So we want to, the idea was to restrict, as I had said earlier, to restrict to what are called fair paths. And how do we characterize fair paths? I had already mentioned that, okay, something occurs infinitely often. So here is, need to constrain the property for checking to fair paths, and how do you specify what are fair paths, and how do you define and how do you specify them? So here is a notion of fair Kripke structure. It has all the components that we had seen earlier: the universe of states, set of initial states, transition relation, the labeling function, and the label, set of labels. In addition, there is F, okay, where F is a set of states. It's a subset of the parset, okay. So, it is, yes, it's a set of states, finite states, where each pi is a subset. It's a finite subset of, yes, yeah. Excuse me? Okay, it's probably crossed off. So a path pi is said to be fair when only if for every p inside, for every p in F, so you have a bunch of a set of finite states. Any of the states inside pi must occur infinitely often in pi. So the pi is said to be fair if one of the states in each of these sets, P1 through Pk, doesn't matter which one, but one of them should occur infinitely often for each of these P's, okay? So a state inside P1 must occur infinitely often, inside P2, and so on, all the way to Pk. And that's why a fair path, and that's the most general way of specifying. You saw in the example that Zubin introduced with Lec9Sep17CTLVsLTLnFairness, he chose a particular state label that he was introduced as process I, which denoted, which was not exactly, that's another thing. So which kind of signified that that process was the one that changed the state, was chosen to march ahead. And that was required to happen infinitely often. So by restricting yourself to those kinds of states which have, states that represent things that desired events, it was made, you can enforce the fairness. So in general, a fair path, a constraint that defines a fair path is something like this, okay? Because there could be several different conditions there. So it's a conjunction of a disjunction, where each disjunction is a infinitely often constraint, okay? So something in P1, one of the ones in P1, P1 should go infinitely often, and P2, and so on. Okay, so this is how it is expressed. There are various different ways. Okay, it's a very general way of doing it, and most fairnesses can be reduced to one of specifying the constraint in this way. We will revisit this later on for when we look at more examples to see what different fairness look like. So in this particular case, the process state component, which was a special component that was introduced, as you can see, that was not as part of the example that was being, it was not part of the state of the example itself, that is kind of introduced implicitly by new SMV to give the user an easy way to say that it is something that it adds a bit to the state internally, to which you could use to specify the fairness constraint, signifying that every process should be given, should not be ignored infinitely often. So given this, okay, the point that I want to make here is that, so a fairness is a bunch of conjunction of constraints, each of which is expressed as something should happen, should occur infinitely often. So that is how it is. So you could simply say, okay, to check phi, then what you really need to do is you want to restrict yourself, the model checking, to that subset of fair paths. So what's the big deal, you may ask? So then, especially if you're doing LTL, you could just do it this way. So, if that F path is a GF, it's an LTL formula, and therefore, in LTL at least, it's it's just model checking a constrained formula. If you want to verify phi, restricting yourself to only some fair paths, and this is what you have to verify, assuming that you have your fair paths, which is expressible in this fashion as G of F. Okay? But unfortunately, because it has this implication in here, it is no longer in CTL anymore. Okay? Because CTL doesn't allow you to apply even these kinds of logical operators on your path formulas. Therefore, the takeaway here that I want you to, the point that I want you to take away here is this fairness constraint. You can't do this in CTL. You can't just add the constraint as a precondition and then use CTL model checking there, because it is not even expressible in CTL anymore. Therefore, point here is the CTL model checking. When we discuss CTL model checking, we will first discuss in the standard way, and then we will do, the fairness has to be handled internally by changing the hard wiring that into the algorithm. So that is the point that I want you to take away from here. Yeah. Any questions? Yeah. Okay, so now I will move on. So I will start discussing real model checking from next class. So since we have some more time, okay, I know that, yeah.
Sir, I have two questions.
Yes.
So I mean, so basically, you're saying that it is not possible to express the fairness condition itself as a CTL or LTL formula.
The fairness condition itself you may be able to express, okay, because GFF infinitely often is expressible. Uh, yeah, but what I'm saying is this way of doing it, okay? Yeah. So in the presence of that constraint, you have to model check as a precondition. That is not expressible, is what I'm saying.
But why can't we not do something like as in so why can't we not write a formula that is something like if the fairness condition holds, then this should hold. Like
But the fairness condition is like an LTL thing, huh? Because this has all these kinds of.
yeah. So why can't we not just like make an implication LTL statement and then check with respect to that? Like if fairness condition, then whatever actual condition we want to check. If we
Yeah,
just model check for this without fairness, then will that not work?
yeah. But the point I'm making is that the standard one, you can't throw this formula at the standard one that checks all paths through CT, for CTL. That's so you will have to, as you on the fly, as you do the algorithm, you'll have to do something. Is what I'm saying. Okay.
Yes, that is basically what I'm asking
Yeah.
is
So that's what you will do. So you'll have to hardwire the
yeah.
fairness constraint into the algorithm. Is all I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, but I mean, I'm asking why exactly we need like so if we have some algorithm to check any say LTL formula,
Any
and then
LTL formula.
yeah, or some formula in some logic in which we can express the fairness condition.
Yeah, but then you can't do CTL model checking, nah? So the CTL model checking is applicable. Okay, it exploits the fact that the formulas are constrained in the restricted to that form. And you will see that LTL model checking is a lot harder than CTL
Ex-
model checking, and you thoroughly exploit the fact that every temporal operator has to be immediately preceded by a path quantifier. Okay, so so you could go outside the logic, yes, but then you're not using CTL model checking anymore, right?
Right. Okay. But like, suppose if we can express the fairness condition itself as
Yeah,
a
then I think you can do that. You can do that, but it might still, yeah. So if the fairness constraint is not so general as in this case, and it's limited, and you can express it as a CTL formula, okay,
right.
then you can do this. Then phi will be in CTL, and you can do CTL implies that. In general,
Yeah.
for
Right. I see.
all kinds of thing in the most general form is something where you cannot express. Is all I'm saying. Yeah?
Right, and it's in general not possible to express certain fairness conditions in CTL itself.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah. You need some, um, but yeah. But even if it is CTL, I think even if you can express it CTL.
if we can express it in
But the thing is, you will still no. Probably you can if you can express in CTL, then this yes. If it's a state, yeah. Then you can. Okay, with the state, every path from that state from the initial state. Yeah, you could do that. Yes,
yeah.
yes. But in general, you will not be able to do. It's more easily expressed as um, you know as some Boolean combinations of these things, in which case you won't be able to do.
But in general, even when we're doing the actual practical model checking, we would want to express the fairness condition in some logic because that would be more symbolic than actual states, right?
Yeah, but I'm not so sure about that because maybe there are better ways you can engineer the restriction in the search process to the paths if you embed that as part of your search in the inside the algorithm. Yeah.
Right. So we can do that, but like when we're actually specifying which are the sort of fair states, like what the state capital F is, how do we do that? Like we, like apart from enumerating subsets of S.
Yeah, that for that you'll have to do. You have to. I mean, if you want to formally do it, if it's not possible CTL, you have to use LTL or some other logic. Correct.
I see, I see. So we have to use it. So we specify fairness in some other logic and
The
then
logic,
use
and
some
then
specialization.
you have to ensure that your algorithm filters your paths as per that.
Right, right. And then we like tailor our algorithm to use, like do
Exactly.
something to take
That's
care of
that's
that.
that's the idea. Yeah.
Right,
Okay. 4:30. So how much time do you need, Zubin?
Just 5 minutes, I think.
Okay.
So should I start?
Usually what I'm afraid is that 5 minutes. So let me ask them, are you guys willing to be here till 5 o'clock today? You guys came late. That's a question. Okay, so you need 10 minutes. Okay, 5, so I will stop. Okay, I will stop in 10 minutes. Okay, so, and then so, I think it's better that you leave it. So 4:45, 4:50, so we will end. This part, even if it is, okay. What am I getting to? Doesn't go. Okay. So here's something. Now I'll be talking, a little bit more about some, things about manipulating formulas, and then just like, for any logic, there is an interesting question is if all the operators are needed, which ones are can be derived in terms of which others, and just like you have for propositional logic, NAND, okay, not and AND are universal set of operators to represent any formula in that logic. Similar questions can be asked for each of these sublogics that we have seen. And there are also various other equivalence laws, just like you have equivalence laws like De Morgan's law and so on for propositional logic. There's very rich theory of theory that has been developed for these logics. Okay. And some of it is not very recent. See, by the way, historically, there's one Israeli person, is the fairly one who got the Turing Award for linear temporal logic. I mean, see, these temporal logics have been known for ages, okay, by logicians, and as early as, the 1930s or things. So they were all called modal logics. Okay? And what he was, Amir Nearly, who was given a Turing Award for adapting propositional temporal logic for modeling programs and then using them in program verification. Okay? The CTL especially was a later invention by, I think it was by Clark and Company, because when they noticed that they could devise efficient model checking algorithm for that. In any case, modal logics in general, of which temporal logic and CTL are, linear temporal logic are all part of, has been studied for a very long time, and there's a very rich theory behind it. What I'm going to show you today are some equivalences and some universality that will be exploited while we devise our model checking algorithms, and so it's important for you to note them. Okay, so X, U, and E, the path quantifier, E and these temporal operators are enough to define all the rest in CTL star F, G, A, R. can be defined. Now, the fact that you can live with E with the negation is kind of should be intuitive, because for all quantifier can always be expressed as a negation of an existential quantifier. Now, for expressing F, G, and R in terms of the other ones is a little bit more interesting, and that's what you will see. Can you see? This is, I've used tiny thing. I hope you can see that and read it. Since I wanted to include a lot of information here. This is classical logic. So F can always be defined in terms of until. So all it says is eventually F has to be true, therefore you make the first argument true. That's also can be expressed as not F until F. Yeah, GFF is true if not, if it's the case that on every path, okay? Yeah, if it is not the case that on every path originating from that, not FS is true, okay? So you can reduce G to F. Yeah, AFF is true. This is follows from universal to existential thing. So this is like saying, if you want to have insist that F holds good on all the paths, then it should be the case that if there doesn't exist any path on which which not FF is true, then it is the case that AFF is true. See, this is the duality operator, okay? In the beginning, when they had, release operator was something that was added, okay, for efficiency reason, as you will see. There is, yes, R can also be eliminated, but there is a reason why R is retained, okay, because it gives you compact specifications, okay, especially when you want to convert these formulas into some normal forms. Just like when you're doing a Boolean satisfiability, etc., it is usually more convenient to work with some normal forms, like logical normal forms, like conjunctive normal form or disjunctive normal form, and so on. We will see that we will work with negation normal form. So this is like it is very much, it's a dual operator in the sense of and versus or related by the De Morgan's law. Okay, that's why I call this a dual of until. So R, I don't know how acquainted and familiar, we have not seen lots of spec with R. So I will give you a small illustration as to why this is true. Okay, first, why this duality law, equivalence law that I've shown is true. So let's first see what is not of F until G. See, what is F until G? G must be eventually true, and up to the point preceding when G becomes true, F has to be continuously true. That's what the semantics of the until operator is. So a negation of F of not of F of UG must satisfy this condition that I have shown on the right-hand side. Either G never holds, that's what this part says, not G is true forever, or F stops to hold too early. Okay, that is even when G before G becomes true, if F becomes false, then that is the other case. Okay, that where it can be violated, which can be stated like this: not G continuously holds up to and including the first time when not f becomes true. Okay, that is f becomes false. Okay, so that is while not g is still true. I mean, it continuously holds. Okay, so g is not. While g is still false, f becomes false. Okay, so that's what this thing is saying. And if you remember R, this R release operator kind of states the same thing. It is kind of a made-up operator so that this duality can be expressed efficiently. So what I'm stating here in English is depicted here, okay, in this picture. So that is not G continuously holds, that is G is false, but F also becomes false even before G can be true. Okay, that's what this part is. The second part is the same. And if you recall, PRQ exactly says something like this. The semantics of P is defined exactly like this. So if you throw away the negation, P releases Q. That's how this thing should be read. Is exactly defined. You can recall. You can go back to your the formal semantics slide, and then this is what it says: either Q holds forever, or P releases Q from that obligation. So what this means is either Q holds forever, Q holds forever. So in which case there's no releasing, or Q continuously holds up to and including the first time at which P holds. Which is, you can see, that's exactly what this thing is saying. If you replace not G with Q and not F with P. Okay, so that's why this is not of F until G is not of F or not G. Okay, and that's why you get so you get this PRQ is equal to not of P until not of Q. It's not that you cannot express this without R. You can actually express it in this fashion. The second part of this disjunction here as something like this, okay? But in terms of until itself, this is exactly, I mean, you will have to think, because I have to give some time to think, so I will, so this is exactly saying the same thing as that, okay? This until operator. Think about it and we'll revisit the thing. So, and that's but the disadvantage of doing this, expressing this way, the negation is, you see that in this formula, not G gets replicated 3 times. Okay, and we will see in the next slide when I try to get something called define a negation normal form, which is kind of pushing all the negation to the atomic, which is a useful thing to do when you're model checking these formulas. There's a explosion. Okay, if you just restrict yourself to U, which is possible, but that's why you introduce R. So we want to keep R anyway, but R is still can be expressed in terms of U. Similarly, there is universality for CTL operators. So there were 7 or 8 different operators. 8, I think, E, X, E, G, U, ER, and all the A versions of these things. Everything can be expressed in terms of E, G, U, and R. And that is that these things follow from these are justified mainly by the semantics of universal versus existential quantifier. A X of F, it says that it's not X of F is true if it's not the case that in the next, if there exists, it's not the case in the next state that X of F can be false. Okay, so here I'm actually using the these equalities in here to push the negation through, and then so I can get it as EX. Okay, so I think I won't be fair to not to give thing. So I mean, rather than rushing through these things, I will do this and then define the negation normal form next time. So are you game? I mean, are you guys? I want to. Let me see how many people are still sticking around. So he will need 10 minutes. So, I mean, 5 minutes is what he said. I'm giving 10 minutes. So, are you guys willing to stick around for 10 minutes? Even if one person says no, I will defer it till next time. Okay, so go ahead. Yeah, so don't worry. I mean, we will get to this and defining the normal forms in a certain way in the next class. So I will stop sharing.
Okay, so
And I'll have to make you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the counterexample that new SMV showed us last class for this.
Yeah, maybe all of you understood, but I thought that it may be, I kind of coaxed Zoom in to explain it in terms of graph to see why his thing was failing. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so here we represent all states with a three tuple: the state of the first process, the state of the shared semaphore, and the state of the second process.
So this is the transition system for the example that you showed. Yeah.
Yeah. So our state can be idle, entering, critical, or exiting, which we represent by I, E, C, or X. So we start in the idle state for both processes with the semaphore false. So the loop that it was showing us was so there's one happy part over here where the first process tries to enter it starts to enter the critical section, it succeeds in doing so. Then it proceeds to exit and goes back to the initial state. So this is fine. Another possible execution is, so this state diagram is symmetrical on both sides. So there's one here. So I haven't
This
drawn
is an unfair
this.
path, correct?
Yeah. This was a, yeah. So another path that, so the actual, this is not an unfair path because the second process never even tried to enter the critical section. But our condition was that if a process tries to enter the critical section, then it succeeds to do so. So now let's see an example of that, a counter example to that. So we start at the initial state. The first process tries to enter the critical section, and then it stops, and the second process instead also starts to enter the critical section. So and so both processes are trying to enter the critical section. Say the first one succeeds. So the first one succeeds and sets the semaphore to true. So at this point, so the first process succeeds and it's in the critical section now. Then it can proceed from the critical to exit and back to the initial state and uh, back, and then try to end, and then it can try to enter once again. So at every point of this, the second process is trying to enter the critical section, but it can't really proceed because the condition over here, if you see, is that not semaphore. So semaphore is uh, true over here, so it can't try to enter the critical section over here, and it can't enter the critical section over here. It can enter here at this stage, but uh, suppose the process is not running at this time. So this is an unfair path.
The process ignored at that time.
Yeah, the process is ignored at that time. So this path where both processes try to enter it, but one keeps succeeding and the other one only happens to run when the semaphore is set to true. So it can try over here in this loop, or it can try over here. There should be another loop over here.
Yeah.
So it can try, but it'll keep failing. So there won't be any progress. So the only possibility is for the first process that actually entered the critical section to keep going on this loop. So the first process will keep entering and exiting the critical section, while the second process will keep failing to do so. So
So
there's one possible execution.
there's two self loops, one here and the one later that is missing, that require fairness constraint running to
Yeah.
eliminate from, right? Yeah. But
Yeah.
the other one, the one that you are, if those two things are eliminated, then your LTL spec will get satisfied.
Yeah. So I think in the assignment we have a problem where uh, we give a different mutex algorithm where we actually ask you to ensure this spec as well, not just mutual exclusion, but starvation freedom, that each process uh, succeeds eventually if it tries to enter the critical section. So that's homework.
So
So
we are, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so I think that's it. Any questions?
By the way, the assignment will be uploaded. I'm aiming towards by tomorrow. And it has two sections. One, some problems on Z3, and the other one, some simple problems for you to get acquainted with new SMB. And you have to code, write new SMB code and so on. So, yeah, so if you have any questions, you can ask or.
Sir, for Z3, can we use Python?
Uh,
No, no,
uh,
no,
you should use SMTLib2, just because the assignment won't be that big, so you don't really need to generate stuff. You can just write it by hand. So for this one, I think it'll be better if you just use SMTLib.
Yeah, but I was curious the way that you asked the question. So you said, if you could use Python, did you ask if you could use Python as opposed to Z3, or what was your question? Hello? I didn't understand his question, so you went silent.
Oh, sorry. I asked whether we can use the Z3 library in the Python to complete the assignment.
I mean, for this one, I don't think you need. So you can just, I mean, if you want to, you can do that. But this will be quite small in the sense, the generating the formula. Sometimes for certain big problems, the task of generating the formula itself will become very, big, okay, cumbersome, and in which case you want to write a program for it. Or you may want to do certain model checking, implement certain model checking algorithms, so some variations of those things, in which case you want to call Z3, the satisfiable, as a subtask, okay? Maybe you will get some such thing on a slightly more complicated program assignment later on, after I cover some basic model checking algorithm. So we will ask you to do some change to an algorithm that you see. Then you will need it. For this one, I don't think it is big enough to require you to do that. You can directly code it up in a file, in that thing, and then run it. Yeah? Yeah. So in the assignment, you will have a code written in like like the language that we used in the class to do the encoding. So you will have to understand that and then code it up in SMV. New SMV. As you can see in new SMV, all it gives you is a way of doing the transition relation. So you have to understand what the transition relation corresponding to that code is, and code it up as a process. Okay, that's all. That's all that I wanted to add. So, yeah. So hopefully, if you have any questions, you can ask us in next class. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, if there are none, thank you, and we'll see you next week.
We can stick around in the Zoom call to discuss the assignment.
Yeah. So that is more than welcome. So what shall I do? I mean, I'll stop recording.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you can continue here.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a like a small question from previous class.
Okay.
So this is regarding the, like sir said that in CTL star we could have a formula such that a certain model does not satisfy either the formula or its negation, right?
Certain models.
Like given a model, the model may not satisfy either the formula or its negation. Like neither.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So could you give an example of such a formula?
Yeah. Then I don't have, I mean, I will explain a situation where you
Right.
can
Yeah.
use to construct it. So make make the property satisfy from one. Suppose it has two initial states.
Right.
So the property is, this is not just for CTL star, it is applicable for any sublogics. Okay?
Right. Okay.
So one of the initial state, the property is satisfied on every path from one of the initial states, but it is violated from another initial state, and vice versa.
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. That's yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's as simple as that. I think it's just
Right.
an artificial. I mean, you can't call it artificial because it's the way that the model checking satisfaction is defined. Okay.
Right. So essentially, it's coming from the non-determinism that might be within the
Correct. It's
system.
exactly coming from the non-determinism. You're right. It's the input. I mean, initial state non-determinism. That's it. Yeah, correct. So I'm going to stop recording, and you can stick around. I made you the co-host,
Yeah.
and if
Everyone else, so we can.
you should ask. I mean, if anybody wants, so either Z3 or the thing that you have, then you can stick around, or you can have another session, whichever way. So I will keep the session alive. Okay, I'm going to turn off the live streaming on YouTube as well.